Welcome to another episode of Apalava, Architecture on the Radio, a series by me, David Paschik. As some of you know, I visited the east coast of the United States in September and had the opportunity to meet several architects and record conversations for Apalava. In Philadelphia, I met architect Brian Phillips, whom I asked to introduce himself for you for a start.
Yeah.
So Brian, thank you for taking your time and joining the show of Apalava. And I wanted you to introduce yourself and also talk about the aim of your office.
Yeah, I'm Brian Phillips. I'm an architect and teacher here in Philadelphia. The office was a little bit accidental when it opened 20 years ago. I think it was partly I imagined it would give me more flexibility in my life and maybe control a little bit more of my destiny. And I think what I realized is that eventually happens, but there's a period of time where you have to really figure it out and work at figuring it out. And I think really the thesis statement was a local practice that could get to know Philadelphia and start to interact with its trends toward more housing, more workplace, more nightlife, which I think has happened in the last 20 years. Philadelphia was at its highest population in 1950 at 2 million, and then bottomed out around 1990 at 1.5 million. And so our office opening in 2005 was really at the same time that the city started adding population in a notable way. And so I think our office has hopefully partnered with the city to think about new opportunities for housing and other kinds of programs.
I have read on your website that your office also concentrates on exploration of new tasks. How is this possible to do in America?
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe, if we would have started our practice in a different city, we may have been so overwhelmed by buildings that there was no room for other things. I'm just speculating about that. But I think we've been busy, but I think maybe this idea of asking questions and inquiry and this critical lens around what does our work mean has led us to thinking more broadly. I do have to credit being a Pew Fellow in 2011, which was about year 5 or 6, which was a nominated fellowship for generally artists. I was like the 3rd architect in the history of the program. And I think that also woke me up a little bit around, wow, like maybe we're doing something that's more than architecture if that was part of the group that we were being included in. And that was a great experience. And I think that jump-started some confidence around applying for grants and taking the research and let's just say non-building side more seriously. And so during my Pew Fellowship, which frankly just helped, I think, life preserve the office in 2000, coming out of the 2008 recession, which that happened 3 years after we opened the office, and that was a pretty bad one. But that did lead to other grants. It led to us having a chance to curate the process lab at the Cooper Hewitt in New York by invitation, and a series of other things. So to really answer your question, I would say determination to make room for it in our practice, that we care about it. But I do think somehow maybe just to expand on this idea about how Philadelphia creates the opportunity, maybe because there's less pressure economically on figuring out your practice to be profitable at a certain level, because it's expensive to live, it's expensive to run a business. It's because there's a little bit of economic room here, maybe that gave us a little bit of space to try some other things out.
Is there also a connection in this research to your job as teacher of architecture?
It seems like, I think there should be more. There is, but people ask me this all the time, and I think I'm not so conscious of it. But I will say that my studios at Penn, where I'm going after this interview, is always picking up timely questions about Philadelphia. Like we did innovative condominiums one year and thought about the ownership structure and where there's space for other kinds of design. Last year I did a low-rise, high-density studio, which references the row house, and in our work we do a lot of that. And this year we're actually looking at housing for new arrivals because, some large coastal American big cities are actually losing young college-educated workers to more affordable markets while their real estate prices go up. And these cities are also being flooded by immigrants, as they were in the beginning of the 20th century. And as, I believe America has been built on this, and we're only as good as the opportunities we give new arrivals. So we're partnering with the Welcoming Center, which is a public nonprofit that's tasked with helping new arrivals land on their feet, find housing, maybe open a business. And so the students are going to explore a mixed use, adaptive reuse around that. But what's interesting is we're also learning about the Welcoming Center's real estate aspirations and housing. So the studio, the practice, we're already talking about maybe a project down the road, and the research, like maybe there's some grant money coming once we establish that. So I think that there is a sometimes intentional, sometimes a little accidental relationship there.
I saw on your website that you did a project like a very affordable house. I think the $100,000 house.
Yeah.
That was in partnership with a real estate development company, or how did that work out?
It was. I mean, that was a really important project for this thesis statement I was talking about when the office started, because that was one of our first projects. And that developer was a software engineer who wanted to get into real estate. We hear that story sometimes. And what was really interesting about that project was it started as big, green, and expensive housing. That was the prompt.
Okay.
Because developers were like, this is where the market is. And I remember the phone call from that client, never forget it. He called me up and said, Brian, I don't want to do big, expensive houses. I want to try to figure out how to do smaller, affordable, sustainable housing that really is for some of the young creatives that are starting to move to Philadelphia. This was right on the beginning of that population curve coming back, and it was a really thrilling, idea. And of course, the program from the client was 1,000 square feet, $100 a square foot to build, LEED Platinum certified, and we kind of laughed. But what I realized is it was a real gift because nearly impossible, but it was so extreme that it had us just not thinking about what's the coolest piece of architecture that we could get on budget, or what's the most amazing detail we can come up with. It was really almost an industrial design project around how much are the nails, what kind of insulation are we using, how do we work with a production contractor to do things that feel custom, and how do we keep the costs under control. So it just had us thinking about architecture out of the gate really differently, and about all the small details, and frankly meeting some of the difficult sides of the marketplace. And housing, the thing about housing is that yes, design is important, but there's a cost and accessibility and attainability and location and all the other things it brings to people's lives that live in neighborhoods are also important, and it takes a lot of different perspectives to figure it out.
But I think at the end you added art to this project.
Yeah, yes. So back to this idea about when you have very few tools, what do you do? When there's not a lot of budget at hand, and it's not going to be about expensive materials or precise construction. It's a whole other conversation we can have about American construction versus, say, European construction. But I think, so we actually, a friend of ours, and maybe this goes to the small community of creative people in Philadelphia that like to do favors for each other, we worked with a silkscreen artist to silkscreen on some fiber cement panels that eventually, that really were kind of the ornament of the building, and plays a little bit to, Philadelphia has an organization called Mural Arts. I think Philadelphia's got more murals than any city in America, something like that, thousands. amazing program. I think we were also aware of that as like that was a kind of an acceptable strategy for urban walls in Philadelphia, that it could be art. So I think that was an experiment around that.
Okay, I visited yesterday the Cherry Street Pier, and you were involved in this project as well.
Yeah.
And that's also, it's like a cultural leisure time. Can you talk a little bit about this project?
I mean, as we get into that, I'll just note that a thread through our whole practice, I think, is this planning phrase missing middle, or economic phrase missing middle, which often gets associated with the bandwidth of housing that lies between luxury and subsidized. It's that everyday middle scale, naturally occurring affordability. And I think we've come to realize that missing middle appears in workplace buildings, it appears in arts and culture. We almost see it as like a layer of a city that crosses many programs. So Cherry Street Pier, to get to that, I think we do see that as a missing middle arts and culture project. It's not the Barnes Foundation Museum, and it's not quite a tactical pop-up in the middle of the street. Or I was saying that this is one of my favorite months of the year in Philadelphia, where the Fringe Festival is happening, which really makes its way on really occupying underutilized space in a very light way. But Cherry Street Pier, in my opinion, kind of sits between those different layers, and we're very interested in that layer for urban life. And so what's amazing about that is it's a 50,000 square foot pier that, when we found it with the owner is the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation, who owns a series of different properties along the waterfront. They had been using it for storage, and they had some feasibility studies done that, it would cost $10 million just to stabilize the foundation of the pier to build a building on it. Okay. They didn't want to do that. And they also didn't want to put luxury condos on the waterfront in that space. They thought there could be another more inclusive program for the city. And so budget was $5 million. Got everything done in that space. And, it's very tactical. It's kind of open air. And we took the roof off the end so there could be a beer garden and some food at the end and the great view of the bridge. And when there's events going, it's very lively and kind of dynamic. And other times it's just sort of kind of quiet and you can kind of hang out. And then there's some shipping containers that are art studios that they do a call every couple of years for people to occupy them. And, some of the ways that we met the budget was, for instance, those shipping containers were prefabricated. They came from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they were not subject to union wage rates, which if they were built on site in Philadelphia, they would be. And those are the only spaces that are conditioned. So we were able to create comfortable spaces in the studios without having to condition the whole pier. So there were a lot of decisions made that allowed that to be affordable and attainable.
Okay, but because it's a very great space to be in, and it's like subsidized by the city, or
so Delaware River Waterfront Corporation is certainly a not-for-profit and probably gets some money from the city, but it's not officially a fully public city project.
Because there's a pier next to it. It's like a park.
Yes. And that field operations designed, yeah.
And there's like sponsoring on every bench. You have who sponsored that, and every tree who sponsored that. So that seems to be a very private initiative compared to that one.
Well, I mean, we were talking a little bit about, how things get done in America versus other parts of the world. I mean, sponsorship is a major part of almost everything. It's like, it's why our sports stadiums are named after banks and other things. It's like they get, so that's just a miniature version of that there's always additional fundraising to be done by inviting people to put some money in.
Okay, how's the dialogue with the city? Because like in Europe, we have these architectural competitions, for example, for schools and whatever. Is there anything comparable in Philadelphia?
I think the competition culture in Europe is much different than America. There are open competitions that often are just ideas. There are invited competitions that often come from an institution like a museum commission or a cultural project. But I think a lot of other kinds of projects like housing or office, et cetera, even when they're big and important, developers might ask, ask a few firms, ones they know from the press or ones they already knew for a response, but there's not as much, it's not a system. One of the things I know about the European competition system is it often allows young upcoming firms to find a foothold. And I think actually in the States, I find that I think a lot of building competitions are actually for established firms to compete against each other.
Yeah, I heard that from
Yeah.
But when like new schools are built, how's that done in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I mean, often firms are selected on qualifications, not the design. So you can put your qualifications in, your portfolio of past work, your personnel. It's sort of a high-level kind of qualifications package. And then sometimes one firm is selected, and then they start the design after the firm is selected. Sometimes a few firms might put a little bit of design energy in, but it's interesting. I think a lot of that work, schools and libraries and a lot of public things like that, the design is not part of the selection.
Yeah, because that's like one generator in Europe or Austria, for example, to like get high-end design and to think about new things.
Yeah.
And it's not only the client deciding on the competition, but you have colleagues and they might select something the client is not aware of the quality, for example. So that's a very interesting point for me. And
yeah. Well, one of the things that I notice in our practice, and of course we're friends with a lot of firms that do work like we do, kinds of projects we do all over the country. And I do think that one of the successes of what I'll call like the American design forward practice, I'll just say it that way, is until you establish your reputation, when you're building it and people eventually come to you with like, I like what you do, let's do that again, or I like what you do and I'd like you to think about my project in an innovative way. Without that competition system to establish yourself through design, you find yourself in the way you sell work and interact with clients, you have to bring people into the world of we should be thoughtful, we should care, we should be innovative, because so much work, there's two sides to this coin in America. So much work is commodified, commercialized, and not meant to be design interesting, but produce profit as the top level. On the other hand, there's room to kind of make your way in whatever way you want. So if you're able to, bring your client into a world of thinking a little differently about their project, you can do that. There's nothing. I think there are ways to do that, and I think there is this like style of American design innovation that is not built in. It's like the designers have to advocate first and create their own space. It's not a foregone conclusion that we should expect it, but and I see the opportunities and challenges of both scenes.
Next stop, 11th Street, for SEPTA Jefferson Station and Regional Railroad, Convention Center, and Bridge Terminal Line. 11th Street Station. Doors are opening. Frankfurt train making all stops. Doors are closing. Next stop, 8th Street, a wheelchair-accessible station for the Rutgers to serve the Admiral House people and National Return. 8th Street Station. Doors are opening. Frankfurt train making all stops.
You are listening to Apalava, Architecture on the Radio. Today's guest is Brian Phillips, founding principal and creative director of ESA, Interface Studio Architects, a Philadelphia-based architecture and research firm, and a professor of the Weitzmann School of Design. In the next part, we talk about the way public space is designed in America. I had a feeling your office also deals with interaction of the building with the public space. Who's doing public space in Philadelphia, for example? Is that a process that is discussed with architects, or is this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated and it's not streamlined, for sure. I think so. Sometimes, there is a city planning commission, for sure, and they will create initiatives, but they're not. American cities don't have a lot of money sitting around. They're sort of left to their own devices to fundraise it, and it's why cities that have like a robust tech sector, where there are some taxes coming in, or they might be a little better funded. And of course, with the pandemic, they're actually cities right now have a little more money than they have in a while, because there was a lot of government subsidy for job protection and kind of business protection. But there's much less precision. It changes from city to city. I would say Philadelphia is much less precise than some places and has a little bit of like a kind of like both openness and maybe messiness about how it pursues these things. Something gets funded, you do it. Something else gets funded, you do it. Maybe they're not coordinated, and there's moments where like, if we knew this was coming, we would have done it differently. Some initiatives go to selecting architects in the way I discussed before, where it's not on design, it's just on qualifications. But then there are small entities that I think pursue things a little differently. For example, we're working for the Fishtown Kensington Business Improvement District, which is it's a business group that's funded by a contribution from each of the businesses, say on a street. And then that money can go toward streetscape, art, public space. We just opened a pedestrian plaza at Cecil B. Moore and Front Streets in Philadelphia, where we collaborated with a local fabricator, Tiny WPA, I don't know if you know these like concrete barriers that were put out into streets during the pandemic to protect outdoor dining areas. I think I see this much more in America than I saw in Europe, but it's a very clunky way to create safety with just they look like they belong on a highway, and here they are on an urban street. But we kind of devised a sort of sleeve that you can put over them that create planters and color and opportunities for art. So you're kind of accepting the bottom line necessity and just making that better. I think that's actually a great example of like how we deal with kind of constraints in America, which is like, you're probably not going to question the highway department's need to have a concrete barrier and start from scratch, but maybe there's a way to make that better by adding something. So, but that was conceived of and funded by a business improvement district, which is technically not the city. It's sort of a neighborhood based. So there's many different levels at which these things happen. Yeah.
But this neighborhood based improvement, this goes into different levels. It goes also into improving housing neighborhoods, as I saw, because you did an exhibition I think it was in New York, where you like asked inhabitants how to improve their housing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Row House Workshop.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. So back to research. I mean, that was a Pew grant we applied for and got. So that was a research grant that we conceived of, received from the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, and the whole premise of that project, and this goes back to like how research and practice feed each other. As we were doing housing, and lots of other people were doing housing in Philadelphia, I think we really had a moment of reflecting deeply on the row house, what it means, and how Philadelphia is quite unique in America with how many row houses it has. It has by far the most row houses of any city. Baltimore is number 2, and there's 450,000 row houses in Philadelphia, right? So like, there's a lot of different kinds of people that all live in the same basic kind of form,
It's like
which is really fascinating.
More than half of the inhabitants.
Yeah,
live in Rome.
it's amazing. So we were thinking, as we are also part of the change. We make new kinds of row houses, sometimes multiple lots turned into other kinds of buildings. And so for us, I think it was a moment of reflection on the row house block and structure and how it builds community and connects people and how essential it is to making Philadelphia what it is. We liked bringing forward some stories and some thinking about the uniqueness of different blocks as really an exhibition for not only residents but for designers, because architects, there's so much, I don't want to get too far off of this comment, but it's important. There's a lot of work that happens in Philadelphia without oversight because the zoning code is designed to allow a lot of things to happen naturally, which puts designers and architects in a position of stewardship. This whole idea that like, just because you can do it may mean you should, it doesn't mean you should do it. So part of this exhibition was to say, we all have to be on the same page with what we're trying to, it's not just nostalgic preservation, it's the fundamental DNA of how the city works. And if you take it too far away from the basic building blocks, how this fabric is knit, you could break it. You could start to disrupt that. So this exhibition was 4 blocks. We had a dinner with each block. We invited residents, just getting the dinner together and finding a space and making friends and just sort of developing relationships with these different neighbors was the first task. And then we had a dinner, and one of the questions we asked was, where were you born and how did you come to live on your block? And some nights that would be a half-hour conversation at least. Like people were sharing and people were like, wow, I didn't know you were from there, and I didn't know that your brother lived around the corner, and it was amazing. And we made some maps. People brought recipes that they imagined for like a block party. If they had a block party, what would they cook? People selected songs for a playlist for that party. People brought objects to share as almost like to put into a time capsule. If someone discovered their block in 50 years, what would you want them to know? And we created these installations that had a model stoop, which is the typical steps outside of your block. And every block might have a slightly different looking stoop, different numbers of steps. Is it turned? Is it straight? We had a large photograph, and we had a cabinet that had a series of different things in it. You could put on headphones to hear the playlist. You could pick up recipe cards, and we had all of the maps and some quotes from the dinner. And so really it was this idea that like, when you look at Philadelphia in an aerial photo, it looks like this relentless grid. And the houses look almost, sometimes I think it looks a little bit like a microchip. When you look at South Philly and all the little houses wired together with these. But when you get on the ground, and then you look more carefully, and then you start meeting people, within that very repetitive system is all this uniqueness that builds through time. And so Row House Workshop was just building that story in a way that, you know, we hoped would address architecture and design and capture some of the spatial qualities, but also invite citizens of Philadelphia to share their blocks. And we did have this idea that we could keep expanding it. We've unfortunately not found, strategy to do that, but maybe in the future we will.
Yeah, it sounds great. I thought these block parties are happening.
Yeah. Well, Philadelphia, before the pandemic, I don't know, I think it's probably come back, something like 7,000 block parties a year. You have to get a permit from the city.
Okay.
It's like if half your neighbors agree or 70% of your neighbors agree, you can close the block. Because, then you can't park. But yeah, it is. It's like the block is sort of the building block. Yeah.
But it's nice that people share across the road, like friendships and whatever.
Yeah.
And neighborhoods, basically.
Yeah.
Because if you know your neighbor, it's not. It's a different feel of the city.
Yeah.
When you do your architect job, what is your favorite moment in doing architecture?
Well, I know it's not at the end. That I know. I always find myself, I think this is typical of everyone, a little disappointed with like, you only see the things that didn't go quite as well, which is, I have this thing that I always remind myself that like, like great projects aren't perfect. This is the battle that architects are constantly doing with themselves, right? That, kind of suspending reality and making a perfect building, for me, sometimes maybe says that you didn't engage with some other issues in certain ways. So I think, I mean, the simple answer to that question is I love figuring out what questions the project should ask. And it's not always obvious, whether it's an apartment building that needs to give something to the street through the way it meets the street, or an open space, or different sides of a building need to say different things to different directions of the city, and maybe there's a change in how it looks. I mean, the story of how a building fits into a neighborhood in the city is always quite important. And I think my favorite parts of buildings are kind of the non-building parts, that's the urbanist in me for sure. But, I think back to this idea about how you do innovative work in America. I mean, you have to be good through the whole process. So as much as I like that early work, we've really built a team that is good at the whole process. There's so many architects that I think become known for, they're good on the documents and construction side, or they're really good on the design side, but maybe not so good on the documents and construction side. Small firms in America have to kind of do it all. And it's very difficult when a small office to gain that knowledge and to kind of iterate and learn. But I think, that is definitely something I take a lot of pride in is that, clients, after you've asked the right questions and put the building in a position to be impactful in all the ways you want it to be, for it then to be built and perform and do all the things that the client's expecting. Because the client will give you room to explore some of these other questions, but in the end, it's what's the net efficiency of the apartments, and is it going to be a maintenance problem, and is it going to be marketable, and so all those things. So but for sure the urban impact and what other than just being a building can a building be is something that I'm endlessly fascinated by.
When you're approached by clients, it sounds to me that you have to go a long way to come to understanding of each other, to get on the same table and communicate the needs of the building side and the program and everything. Do you have some kind of structured communication system, or is it done individually?
Yeah. Well, I will say, as I think about the whole arc of our 20-year business history, it's gotten easier. And I think it's because clients know what to expect when they work with us now. And so many clients self-select. In the early days, which is much more fun to talk about, and by the way, I love all of our clients, and if any of our early clients are listening to this, they'll know I'm saying this with affection. Some of the early clients were like, hey, I need an architect, and I need it to be inexpensive, and I need to get it done fast. And then they come into the office, and then it starts. Well, what about this? What about that? We need some more time to really figure this out. And it wasn't a matter of getting huge fees or being paid more. It was literally a matter of starting to figure out how we want to practice. And there was something incredible about taking a client, and by the way, it's two ways. We're learning and they're learning together. But to take a client who didn't expect to win a design award with their very inexpensive tiny apartment building, and then realizes through the process that, wow, there is something like being a developer and making buildings is more than just a transaction. I think that there was and is an excitement in that relationship that feels like even if they never work with you again, whoever else they work with, they're just going to come at it maybe with a little bit more patience for whatever the next architect brings, or even in themselves start saying, actually, this is the program, or this is what my goals are. I will say that we have some of those initial clients are still our clients. And I think that that's really special for us, that, we have such a really deep understanding of what we expect of each other. And it's not continuous. We're not always engaged with those clients, but we just started working for a client again that we hadn't worked with in 10 years. And it was like meeting an old family member or something, because you kind of start where you leave off and you kind of know what it's going to be like. Yeah, it's with ISA. We're going to have a couple extra meetings and we're going to talk a little more and we're going to find something that's really good. But of course, we still have to always deliver on their schedule and on their budget. Like in the end, I think one of the reasons why we've been successful in building these relationships is I like to think our clients don't go away and go, oh God, that took a year too long and was twice as much as I wanted to spend, which one might argue like maybe that's what it takes to do architecture. This is one of the great chases of the American design culture is like, one might say, but you shouldn't do it for that little, that fast. But I think it's always about like pushing a little bit on those issues, but getting a lot more for it.
You are listening to Apalava, Architecture on the Radio. Today's guest is Brian Phillips, founding principal and creative director of ESA Interface Studio Architects, a Philadelphia-based architecture and research firm, and a professor at the Weitzmann School of Design. Now we talk about the approach, how ESA's architecture gets built. In order to reach these goals, do you work with general contractors, or how does that work?
Yeah, wow. So one thing that is also interesting is all of those clients, or many of those clients that I just identified as early return clients that we've gotten to know, almost all of them build their own work. And that, when you're doing very high-end, sophisticated, expensive buildings, you don't want the owner and the contractor to necessarily be the same person, right? You want the best possible contractor. You want a supportive owner, And there's a little bit of a good like back and forth there, each like keeping their, bringing their expertise and asking questions of each other. When you're trying to do a lot for a little, having the owner self-perform all or some of the building is very valuable because they can understand some of the risks being taken or not taken by doing certain kinds of things. You can talk to them directly about how to execute. It's not like then there's another contractor who, to be honest, is probably not going to be like, that's where a lot of money gets spent. And we're always elevating or working with contractors to help get something that is a little extra special than like trying to control the cost of a very sort of sophisticated, like higher end contractor. So I think that our best work has happened with self-performing clients. Yeah. Excess house, self-performing client, powerhouse, self-performing client. This building we're sitting in, self-performing client. I mean, I think it's definitely a typology of client that we've been enjoying working with.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So it almost we have traditional contracts, but it does almost feel design build sometimes because when the owner and contractor are the same and the way we work very hand in hand, we love to talk construction like in schematics. You know, is this going to be a wood building? Is this going to be a steel stud building? Is this going to be a concrete building? Is this going to be some combination that makes it easier to access the site and will save money in certain ways? Like, we're talking about those things very early. And I think that is both good for client relationships, that you don't get to a point where you bid something and they go, we can't afford this. This makes no sense, right? It's always important to like try to prevent those.
Yeah, but when you
moments.
have self-performing clients that are able to do this, then they are very aware of the costs, probably.
Yeah. Well, and you know what's interesting? I think sometimes too, if they're not, and things are a little bit more expensive, they partly take responsibility for it. So I think in a way it does. It's not like the owner will go $200 a square foot. I don't want to see anything else. If it's a self-performing client, you come in at a little bit higher than that, and everybody kind of knows why, or maybe you don't know why, but the client authorized this direction with construction in mind. I think it actually gives a little bit of room to things like budget.
Okay. As long as they, well, in my personal experience, they don't execute exactly like planned, then it's all difficult. So this goes back to imperfection, right? This goes back to, and maybe this also goes back to impact, right? Like, what are you really wanting to get out of that building? You know, is it the way that commercial space meets a corner or holds a corner? Is it that terrace open space? Is it that underpass that creates an urban connection? And you start to see the work as, prioritizing its purposes, and then there's that moment like, wow, like I wish we could have gotten that light in a channel. I wish we could, it's like I wish we could have finished that joint a little better, but yeah, I know. That's the way it is.
It is.
One question for your teaching role. What expectations do your students have? What do you have to teach them?
Well, I mean, I think I think that this piece of the process that I really like, this what are the questions and what are the impacts, are definitely something that I'm conveying to students. And we spend some time reading, meeting influencers, like people that are around the issues, whether it's politicians or economists or nonprofit executive directors. The students will have exposure to those conversations. And then, in the studio projects, it's sort of, there's that same moment of what's the thesis. And it's not just a formal or material one, it's an urban, social, political, economic one. What if my building did this? And getting to that statement and then figuring out how you answer it through a design is, I think, something that I hope the students I have are selecting my studio based on learning and experiencing that process. and then having the building fulfill that goal. And I at reviews, whether it's in the middle or the end of the semester, I think that some of the best projects, we're always talking about the building, of course, but some of the best projects lead conversations on, like, wow, like this really changes the way I was thinking housing could affect this issue, or if someone from city government's at the review, a light bulb goes off and they think, man, if we just change this piece of the zoning code, maybe we'd be able to have this in a. So I like for the work also for the students to see that the work isn't just within themselves, at their desk, in their computer, in their office, in their room, as a personal piece, but and even if that includes lots of collaboration with all kinds of people, but the fact that the work itself speaks and that buildings are, they're part of the public realm and their very design, the questions asked in their very design help shape the future of the built environment. And so I hope that they get that out of the experience.
Mm-hmm. Is there any special source of inspiration you get?
I have been so inspired by Philadelphia in the last few years since the pandemic, and it's really been fueling me lately because, the creative culture, the people, the communities, the food scene, the music scene, the art scene. Every city has this, but I've been so inspired by, at this stage of my career, being able to really connect with it, know a lot of people, and hopefully, add some value to what I think of to some degree as the city coming back from a very difficult moment. And Philadelphia is a fragile place. It doesn't have a lot of money. It doesn't have a lot of new hyper-powered industry. It's an old city with incredible history, with some really important institutions, that is this affordable oasis on the East Coast. I mean, I love the fact that young people and immigrants can arrive in Philadelphia and not get crushed by expensive rents and all kinds of, you can kind of make your way. And this inspires me. And I connect it back to our work, and I learn about our work through this, that's what we're doing. But I think we're also really excited to, in our next decade, we're hitting this 20-year mark, to really, in a way, kind of double down on Philadelphia and continue. We're working around the country, and it'd be very easy for us to kind of look elsewhere. And I think I'm just so inspired by kind of continuing to figure out how we can be useful here. And I'm happy to talk about this nonprofit initiative at some point, which I think is part of this, right?
So, you can just
okay, great. So related to this exact thing, and this, I'm extremely excited about this idea. We've launched an organization called Meantime, and this came out of seeing a lot of our buildings with our clients get built, have all the apartments upstairs rent, and have ground floor retail sit vacant for weeks, months, years. The pandemic has not helped. And I think when we talk to some of our clients about why is that space vacant, and they tell us, well, we're looking for $5,000 a month for 5 years, that's the lease terms. And I think to myself, well, are these tenants out there now? Is real estate adapting to the changes in the background economy? And so I think we started to think about, what if there was a way to systematize short-term occupation, 1 day, week, 30 days, 60, 90 days, whatever it is, that emphasizes community businesses, entrepreneurship, new ideas, arts and culture, social services. And as an architect, I think we, in a way, literally hold the keys for understanding the zoning code and figuring out how to get the bathrooms in there we need, or how we can lightly condition a space or do a small fit out that makes it feel good, right? So one of the hurdles is small businesses don't have they have to go hire an architect. They have to find money to do their fit out. They have to negotiate a deal with a sophisticated developer. It's like everything's stacked against
They have to buy goods,
small business.
right?
Exactly.
It's a lot of investment.
I feel like so many layers of Philadelphia, neighborhood level, developer level, city level, institutional level, should want to ensure that the streets of Philadelphia, the street life, the storefronts, the vibes of corridors feel occupied, vibrant, aren't just full of corporate brands, but full of local energy, right? So I think that's really the goal. And we are throwing big events in interesting buildings that our clients are in the process of renovating. So we're developing relationships with the real estate community and bringing artists and kind of performance into those spaces. We're working on a focused pop-up on South Street with the Philadelphia Commerce Department, which is super exciting, where they're looking to help subsidize a 30-day pop-up. This is really kind of, for me, the baseline experience is to prove out a 30-day pop-up with multiple tenants that is fully scripted to animate a storefront, and then that maybe becomes replicable, where then we can really map out how to repeat that in other neighborhoods and other spaces.
Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks. Very excited about it. Excited about it, and I think
it's
again,
the same topic in Austria. They prefer
yeah.
to have them empty for ages, and the whole neighborhood goes down because we have many empty shops.
Yeah,
The value, it's strange. It's bad.
Yeah, well, and I was in Berlin this summer for the second time, but was reminded of what appears to me, obviously, with like the club scene and the music scene and lots of nooks and crannies repurposed for little bits of events and enjoyment and nightlife. And it does feel like there is a kind of, there's a real embrace of like using interesting spaces in interesting ways, for sure.
Yeah, because I think there's, after so much things shifting to the internet and ordering via internet, shopping online, people do want to go to shops and check out the things and get a real feeling, and also connect with the salesperson or the small business around the corner.
You know what I've been thinking a lot about? I've been thinking a lot about how cities 50 years ago were the internet. You'd have to go to a city to buy that dress from Paris, or that book that just came out, or see that film that you can only see in the Lower East Side because it's the only theater that can get its hands on it. Today, all of that stuff is available everywhere. And now cities have almost become the opposite, which are deep commitments to localisms. Like, we care about the chef who's sourcing his food from just outside of town, and the fashion designer who's making clothes in her, just out, down the street from her apartment. And I think that it's an interesting shift that, in a way, you can get anything living out in the middle of nowhere delivered to your door, but you have to come to a city to like really feel the localness, which and maybe this is a bit of a Philadelphia perspective, because I think, Philly's a little less of a global place than, say, a place like New York, but New York certainly has this as well. And I think there is this, I think that's part of the practice and part of the research and part of the nonprofit is, if that's what the next decade is going to be, we want to be part of it, and we want to help in every way we can to establish the best possible expression of that. And in the end, I think it is about, the one thing I'll also say about this idea of the pop-up meantime program is it's also about keeping economic loops local, right? If you're companies from out of town whose headquarters is in another state, money comes out. Yeah. Local business hiring 2 or 3 local people that then get paid and pay their rent in your city, that has like real impact, right? You're really focusing on, instead of chasing big tenants that are much more sort of global in their reach and their economic loops, focus on local. So I think that all kind of comes together around that issue.
That sounds great.
This was another episode of Apalava, Architecture on the Radio. Today's guest was Brian Phillips, founding principal and creative director of the Philadelphia-based architecture and research firm ESA, Interface Studio Architects, and a professor at the Weitzmann School of Design. For more information, visit their website at es-architects.com.
As you know, a large number of previous episodes of Apalava can be found on our website at apalava.com, which was recently relaunched. Join the Apalava mailing list and follow the series on social media. As the show's editor, I, David Paschik, wish you a great day.
When it opens